Mars Day, Jupiter Hour, and this is all things Mars episode. So we are getting ready for the Mars Cazimi in November 18, which basically means Mars conjuncting the Sun in Scorpio, and basically beginning a new cycle of the Mars and Sun relations or synodic cycle. I also am going to talk about my own Mars return and kind of like the past 2.1 years and what is a Mars return and what should we pay attention to for this cycle that closes and opens in our lives. And so let's begin. Well, first of all, with the planets right now, we have ascendant ruled by retrograde Saturn in Pisces that in just a couple of days is about to turn direct. And the midheaven is ruled, of course, by Mars, applying to Mars here in between the Sun and Mars. And we actually talk about the Mars Cazimi, so you can see how. And since we're talking about cycles of time, it makes sense that Saturn is going to appear. And look at the IC. The IC is on Jupiter, which is the ruler of the hour. So you see, this was not pre-elected, but it's to kind of show you how there is a connection between what we come to speak about, when we come to speak about it, and so on. And I'm actually talking about a closing of a Mars cycle for me as well in this episode. So it makes sense that the moon is also closing in, and Mars is about to close in a cycle with the Sun. The moon is on Aldebaran today. So the moon in Gemini is on Aldebaran. So victorious themes of victory, I guess, are probably going to, and themes of a victory over assets or territory or stuff like that. Kind of being victorious in material way, I guess, is what Aldebaran signifies. So very interesting. Mercury, the ruler of the moon, is also in Scorpio, separating from a conjunction with Mars. Mars and the Scorpio in the 11th house, so of course, Mars is being public. So without further ado, I want to talk first about what's coming, and what's coming is the Mars and Cazimi. Yeah. If we are arguing about the food I made, it means my food is good. So Mars and Cazimi happened on November 18, 2020. Before I say the word Cazimi, this is a tight conjunction. Cazimi, for the Mars, whether it's visible or not visible, you really need to observe the sky. It's not by the degree. It's a bit more intricate than that. But when I talk about the Mars conjuncting the Sun, I'm talking about a renewal of Mars energies. Okay, when anything conjuncts the Sun, and it's not always Cazimi, sometimes it's just combust. I think Ksenia Moore mentioned that it's going to be combust. The difference is I guess, who is covering who. And this is also important to note because I know people were planning to do a Mars Cazimi talisman, and it's combust. Combustion with the Sun, or co-presence with the Sun, is actually more challenging. Okay, it's the conjunction, it's the hard aspect. But what we do get from this conjunction is that Mars is going to reopen a cycle. Okay, when anything conjuncts the Sun, it receives an update from the Sun. And that is also true in the combustion. It's just the combustion is going to be more, perhaps aggressive, perhaps heated, more heated. co-presence. But the notion that a new cycle of Mars and the Sun is about to begin, and right now this cycle is closing, basically as the Sun is catching up to Mars. And what do we get here on a mundane level or on a general level is there is a new beginning as to how we see Mars, how we do Mars. Mars is war strategy. Mars is the strategy in our life in general. Is drive, passion, getting ahead, also sexual drive, the penis, in Scorpio, the penis, iron absorption, perhaps, with this aspect. Mars has to do with our fight and our self-assertion. Mars in the more scorpionic has to do also with poisoning, deep psychological insights, also crisis and innovation. This is also Mars is the ruler of Aries. And with the conjunction with the Sun, basically we're ending up a cycle of doing Mars or trying to do our Mars in a particular way, and beginning a cycle with new insights. So when the Mars conjunct the Sun, we're going to have new eurekas. Because it is combustion, then Mars, I think, is going to be less powerful here. Although it's at its home sign, it's just receiving too much heat from the Sun and is diminished in its power, okay, with the cycle. So we need to think about this as well, because this is an opening note on a symphony of, the Mars synodic cycle. And as the Sun approaches, we begin to reconsider, we begin to see things pertaining to Mars that we have not been considered, or the way that things worked out or didn't work out, which is why it's so similar to a Mars return, which also we'll talk about. Because we can kind of think about what have we learned about aggression, about war tactics, about asserting ourselves, about our fight, our sexual drive, our iron absorption as well. Okay, Mars also rules iron. What have we learned about men in our lives, veteran soldiers? What did we learn that we know now that we didn't know even just a couple of months earlier? And what do we do with that? Okay, it's a very Mars question. What do I do about what I know? So let's go to a relatively easy topic. Not during world hunger, but well, let's talk about iron. Let's say that in the last Mars synodic cycle, that is where the Sun going through all of its aspects with Mars, you began with, or the previous conjunction, you began with thinking and looking at your iron absorption. And you began to try things. So you were told that you should eat meat, and then you ate meat, but it wasn't enough. And then you were told you should eat only greens and no dairies, and you tried it, but it wasn't enough. And then a war happens. There's no grain, the sugar prices are high, and suddenly your iron absorption actually becomes better. For example, okay, one study case. It could be. You're like, oh, it was that. There were those things interfering with that iron absorption, okay? It can really be as simple as that. Or, alternatively, you were trying to do a leg press, okay? And a leg press is basically when you fold one leg up and stretch the other one, and you're like, I'm pretty flexible, I'm pretty fit, I don't manage to do a leg press. And then um, along the time you found out that, well, your toes are not straight and the bone structure of your feet is not straight. And when you tend to that, you will be more able to do a leg press. Okay, so you could begin, for example, with the Sun Cazimi in working on your toes, or you might have done something about it and you end the cycle of Mars with a leg press. Okay, it can really be something as simple. I'm going to the simple things on purpose because there is just so much mundane right now. Okay, and yes, people are looking at weapons. For example, one of the things that I have learned is with the war, I looked at the Art of War book, and the very first chapters, you learn more about how war is expensive, how besieging a city is the most expensive thing that you can do war-wise. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, well, they're doing the most expensive thing that they could do war-wise. That means that somebody has exerted to a certain level of violence that is so expensive that the morality of whoever is taking part in sieging cities is very easily diminishable. Okay, it's like there are more things standing to our part. Somebody puts so much power in trying to oppress us. They're losing strength. Okay, which can be a point of optimism. We still have to do something about it, but it's also important to understand that besieging thing is really expensive to maintain us. It's really expensive, and when soldiers have to do this, it's really expensive. Pretty much the second after would be boots on ground, and that's basically being more aware of strategy as I see it happening, whether in my country, whether in Maui, or other places that we see, and so on and so forth. So on a mundane level, we're basically finishing up this cycle with actual cities being besieged, like Maui, like southern Israel, and like Gaza. And by the way, one of the things that I, as Israeli, looked at, the option that was offered to basically transfer Gazans to Sinai. I was like, this is not coming from an Israeli for sure, because Sinai is a location of retreat that Israelis love. It's the most sought for near destination to vacation. Okay, I'm probably one of the only Israelis who haven't been to Sinai. Even though my mother wrote a book about it. So you just look at that and you're like, okay, this is not something local. Nobody would want to give Sinai. We fought very hard for Sinai, then we lost Sinai, and nobody would want to push an entire population to that particular area where you come to retreat for a holiday. And you definitely don't want to meet people who see you as a Nazi, oppressor, imperialist, colonialist, apartheid, and so on and so forth. That would ruin your vacation. Because just thinking in the way that people who would make such decisions would think, which is another Mars thing. Okay, and now as we're seeing what's happening in Maui, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Israel, what happened in the Netherlands, and we see how different excuses are being served to evacuate people from their land altogether. What also is happening on a mundane level is that those who execute Agenda 2030 see the actual manifestation of the strategy on land. Okay, and they see, do people talk about it? Do people do something? Do people begin to connect the dots between Netherlands farmers and Maui and Gaza and Israel? Did the card of Israel-Palestine work successfully? I'm going to talk about the Aries cycle in another episode, because that pertains in partial to what people call anti-Semitism, and I think the more correct term would be anti-Jewish. And how perhaps both the Irish community and the Jewish community has been kind of like marginalized, pushed to the side, but also accused of controlling the world and many things like that throughout very long cycles, but also checking up with Aries. What's been happening since? Because this is not just Israel, not Israel, it's just 75 years in Israel. And that is an interesting episode of its own. And Aries is also ruled by Mars. So, yes, on a mundane level, we have seen in the past 2.1 years, since Mars has been to or will be in 25 degrees Scorpio, we have seen the war in Ukraine, we have seen Maui, we have seen Netherlands farmers, okay, the barping of the cows, I call it the barping of the cows evacuation, or the farting of the cows evacuation, because I think it's the most compatible name for it, is the farting of the cows. What basically happened in Netherlands in recent months was that farmers were no longer allowed to grow anything in the excuse that their cows fart and it's carbon emission, and they can't grow food in Netherlands. Okay, so bye bye cheese, bye bye Alkmaar, bye bye all the things that symbolize Netherlands, and in the beginning people really accepted it because the environmental excuse or environmental washing was very compatible with the Netherlands. Because on the tat, there's like, oh, well, people will not eat meat anymore, it's okay. But then they discovered that they cannot grow other crops as well. And it was just an excuse to deprive people of their lands. And now the farmers who used to own land basically have issues with the government. I was in a situation where it's very difficult to say particularly lucky because I'm now in southern Israel, but I was particularly lucky in the COVID because at that time I was in between houses in the Netherlands and I was offered to work like for farms, and I was afraid that that would turn into sex trafficking because I couldn't trust the people, and if I can't work, then I won't be having another option, so I couldn't go into it. And if I had gotten into it, even if the farm owners would genuinely be farmers and it would genuinely be work, I would be casted out and won't have a solution myself, even though I have Dutch nationality. Okay, so this was for Netherlands, and for Maui it was like, oh well, natural disaster, yeah, which we already know it was not. And then they besieged Maui, basically ethnically cleansed Maui. Can we say it the way it is? They ethnically cleansed Maui. So for the Dutchies, they were working with rules and regulations and environmental stuff. For Maui, natural disaster, which was basically ethnically cleansing Maui. Then southern Israel will say the Palestinians do it. Yeah, and we've been sitting waiting for them for like hours for like somebody from the state to come and help, and they were slaughtering people the night before that. It was already 6 October. And then for Gaza, well, Israel is performing genocide. 10,000 people dead in Gaza. I don't think Israel could ever have had any legitimacy to do that nationwide. And I know what has been in Gaza, but like this is not, Israel would never ever have the legitimacy to do that unless Agenda 2030. And we see that the third option that is being offered to Gaza is to evacuate them to Mount Sinai, which is basically a stab at the heart of the Israeli, because Mount Sinai is something that Israel fought to conquer, had to give up, returned to vacate on, is one of the best destinations for Israelis that is near Israel to vacate. And it is a really important destination. So to put Gaza there is not an Israeli idea in any way, shape, or form. It's even kind of like a stab at the heart of the country and at the heart of Israel. It's like you really need to understand the regional politics to get it. So then that's the question. Do people begin to connect the dots between Ukraine? Because Ukraine and Russia is like, well, they were fighting over Crimea, so let them fight. Do people begin to connect the dots? Or do people still think that we just had the Ukraine, Russia, the Maui, the Netherlands, the Israel, Palestine, and who knows what next, the Texas, USA. And it's just all been happening because it's all been happening. And so the world is going chaotic in a very orchestrated way. And it's all about land, it's all about real estate, and there are our agendas. We also are discovering that, and we also are being more and more aware of certain militant actions that are being taken or not being taken, of militant strategies. And with this information, it's continued to come up. Okay, Mars is only in 7 degrees Scorpio. It has it has 15, 18 degrees, 18 degrees to go within the sign before it reaches the conjunction with the sun. So there's more to uncover. There is closure. And the closure, we really see it on Agenda 2030. Okay. The other day I was joking that if they would turn Mount Sinai to 15-minute city, the world has completely lost it. Because that was like the most quiet place on earth, where you order a meal and it comes a couple of hours later, and everyone is okay with this because this is the spirit of the place. And that's just, imagine that as 15-minute city. This is insane. Insane, like, even from a bird eye view, is insane. And right now we're basically seeing the implementation. Okay, if 2.1 years ago people would say, do not obey, there are crazy people trying to control the world, and that had all been 1, 2, 3, 4 helicopters. Wait, I'll let them make them sounds. Since it's helicopters, I'll look at the news later because these are 4 helicopters. So I guess they are looking to rescue people, and they're heading towards the Dead Sea. I hope everything is fine. It doesn't look pretty. And they look like military stuff. Like it's not from Soroka Hospital or something like that. Okay, as we speak about Mars closing in, yeah. So, I'm sorry, there is war in the way. As we speak, if 2.1 years ago, we basically heard something that was a very, unless you were an astrologer that's going through Pluto in your 12th house, you would like, people told you to buy land, people told you to grow your food, but don't obey, maybe the beginning of the don't obey. The Schwab, I think Gigi Young was one of the first people who talked about you will own nothing and be happy. And now we're seeing it going from theory, from what people thought as conspiracy, to action plan, to being manifested in the real world within 2.1 years. Okay, there's a Mars cycle. And so if you were thinking about Schwab as this crazy person with crazy ideas and who's gonna, now you're actually seeing the most expensive act of war, that is besieging cities and ethnically cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is a very expensive war tactic. Okay, and this also brings to perspective previous times in history where we thought, oh, this is a genocide of the 2 world wars, and it was like, oh, the whole world is going crazy. But somehow we had the money being detached from the gold, and changing of the fiscal system, and was that to do with like why there were world wars? Now we're seeing social credit score already happening in certain places in the world. And you think about something, you think, why was there a world war needed to improve upon our economy if that was an improvement? Well, if that was an improvement, nobody would commit multiple genocides. Just pull the anti-Semitic card. Woo! Which is working fantastically for the people. But we also need to understand that we are in the context of Pluto going from Capricorn to Aquarius. And so we, the people, are going to receive the power. Okay, Pluto is like a torch of power and exposure of that power that's being, it's kind of like the passing of the torch when Pluto ingresses to a sign. There's the passing of the torch from structures and pyramids and those on top to we, the people. And meanwhile, what we're doing with that is a lot of ridiculous things like painting Stars of David's Jewish household where, just today I thought about, and that was also occurring, okay, even within the country that I'm living in, if we're talking mundane, then we had a civil unrest between Israeli Arabs, not even Palestinians, or people who necessarily identify as Palestinians, Israeli Arabs and Israeli non-Arabs. Now, Jews and Arabs are Semitic. We don't look that different. And so basically, a couple of people wanted to lynch a person twice. Okay, it was happening in 2019, I think 2020. And these people were basically, there were a couple of, twice, one case was a couple of Israelis that are not Arabs, thought they caught an Arab Israeli and started to lynch him, only to discover he is not Arab Israeli. And the same thing happened with a couple of Arab Israelis, thinking they caught a non-Arab Israeli, only to find out it's an Arab Israeli, okay? War is ridiculous. And so what's happening in the world right now as to the Israel-Palestine is that Jews or Israelis don't feel comfortable abroad, like they don't feel safe, but basically any Palestinian person could be killed over that. Like, we look the same. We look the same. And some of our slang is the same. Okay, an Israeli Jew would say inshallah just the same as a Palestinian. Even a Palestinian Christian, which I didn't know. And the word, like a lot of the words, whether it's like halas or whatnot, we get angry, we speak even the same language. So it's going to be very ridiculous, very peculiar, and very hilarious around the world, because people are going to try and target Jews for being Jews, and they're gonna, for sure, a lot of Palestinians are going to die because of that, and perhaps even vice versa. At a certain point, perhaps even vice versa. So, war is ridiculous, and the ridicule of war is more to do with the Aries episode than to the Mars one. But it's important to note, as Mars is also ruling Aries in the past 100 years or so, right now. So this is the Mars Cazimi, which I already interlaid the Mars return. When you have a Mars return, you're basically having a restart as to the planet being returned. So everybody knows about Saturn return, which is around 28 years of age, and we have even the Saturn return club for people who don't make it to Saturn return. But then there is there's Venus return, there's solar return, okay, every birthday, around every birthday. There is a return for every planet, and Mars takes 2.1 months to years to return to the same spot it was. What happens is something that is quite similar to the Cazimi. It's a new beginning of Mars, with the exception that it doesn't get the light boost from the sun, okay? So the way you deal with a return of a planet, you basically take a look at the time before and after the return. for some it's weeks, but it's basically as it enters the sign, it's a good time, even if it's Saturn, to begin to look at and to reflect, and you will see it happening naturally. Those reflections, those memories, those thoughts are going to happen naturally as you begin to close the cycle. And it's about going to 2 years and 1 month, around 2 years and 1 month time back, and thinking, where was I in terms of my drive, my rights, my assertion, my nourishment in terms of iron absorption, my blood flow, my relation to blood and bloodline, my acting on my values, or my acting in my being active in the world, being active about things. What was I doing? Literally, what was I doing? What were my actions in this cycle? Yeah, the yawn. And it's a time for reflection, because you reflect upon what you've learned, what you're taking with you, and you reflect also upon what you're changing. And at the time where Mars begins to move, to go on that Mars return spot, this is where you really want to understand what's happening in your chart, what are the transits, what's going on, and tend to it, because this is where you're beginning a timestamp of something that will accompany you and begin to develop into a plot for the next 2.1 years. Okay, this is every time you have a Mars return. You also need to take a look at where your Mars located. Around my Mars return, I began to build up for what would be my COVID expedition to Netherlands. And there were a lot of themes to do with litigation, with the understanding the structure, okay, the international court system, the algorithmic problem. Any country that would have an international court within it is problematic to sue this country. The exploration, the actions taken, the way I see Mars, new concepts of, what do I call aggression? What is the reasoning for aggression? New ways to tend to sexuality and issues of sexuality, boundaries and setting boundaries, very Mars thingy. So this is also a time to look at what has developed, okay? And what is developing. For example, Mars only 3 degrees from my original Mars return is going to be Mars-Sun conjunction. And this conjunction is going to separate, or my Mars return is going to be a very tightly separating aspect with Uranus in Taurus, okay? And so if 2.1 years ago I had Uranus on my Sun, then now Uranus is going to be almost opposing my Mars as it returns. Okay, right after, and the return and the opposition is going to be within my Mars return. So I'm going to have a very volatile timestamp for this Mars return. And we see that the moon will conjunct Pluto and sextile the Mars Sun conjunction, the combustion of Mars basically, and that it will apply to square Saturn but trine Neptune, okay, and oppose Uranus. So it tells us that there's going to be a lot of mundane relevance to this this Sun-Mars conjunction. For me, it's happening in my 9th house. It's international affairs, traveling, worldview, academic studies. I don't suppose so, but definitely there are a lot beginning there. Now you would have to look at what is Scorpio in your chart to understand the relevance to you. And if you have a Mars in Scorpio, this is a Mars return for you, then it carries a 2 years and 1 month cycle. So the timestamp for a return of a planet is kind of like a solar return. It tells you about where things will take you in terms of that planet. Okay, and when it's Mars, again, it's drive, it's action, it's getting somewhere in life, doing something about something, and what are the challenges and the things that contributed. It's also by addressing this Mars in your own natal chart. Okay, for me, this little conjunction is happening around my Mars return, and what I was looking at today was actually the opposition between transiting Mars to my natal Sun, and looking at the applying aspect of Mars opposition Sun, and bringing in the Mars trine Sun or the Mars sextile, only to find out that Kurt Cobain also had a Mars trine Sun, and even a 0 degrees orb, like a tight aspect. And it didn't save him from, it didn't save his life. It just made him very successful in his music, albeit what he was dealing with in his life. So there's just kind of reassessing how do I do my Mars? Where are the places where I act not in accordance with my confidence or with my shine or with what I'm building or the person that I'm going to be, which is the Sun. And then when Mars is opposing it, then there's more personal Mars opposition or Mars hard aspect in Sun. Is basically when your personality and your actions are basically at odds. Okay, and it can kind of rub people the wrong way because Sun is also leaders and is in the shine. Okay, and Mars is action. So you could have rash action or action that's against your best interest. Or simply the fact that your personality and your actions and your drive have a dissonance. Okay, if I'll take an example for my Sun, which is in Taurus. Sun in Taurus, it just wants some peace, basically. Some soil, some peace, some good food, some good music. It's a fixed earth sign. The word ease is very important for the Taurus. Mars in Scorpio is all about the opposite polarity of that. Is a transformation from the core continuously, because Scorpio is a fixed sign of transformations. It's constantly transforming from the core. Okay? So my drive or how I act in life is creating constant transformation from the core through crisis, and that is causing an existential crisis to my Sun, and it causes me to feel heartbroken quite often, more so than I would like, because in terms from the perspective of my Mars, I just grow more resilient, I develop my fight, I assert myself, and from as far as Mars is concerned, I do become more confident, but the more this happens, my Sun actually feels diminished. Okay, it's like, where is the peace? Is there any hope for me to have peace in this life? And then that requires for tending to and remediation. Okay, so these are things that absolutely tend to around my Mars return, where I have in the same week Mars conjuncting Sun. Okay, now put a Venus there, and I would think about Mars and Venus. I would think about relationships. I would think about connections. I would think about business, because Venus is also asset. I would think about, are my actions in alignment with my values, rather than are my actions in alignment with who I am as a person, or what, the kind of person that I like to be. Okay, if I consider myself a peaceful person and I constantly act in a way that digs at the core of things, especially when it comes to higher education, international relations, academia, and Mars in Scorpio is relentless. That creates a dissonance within me that I come in peace, but my Mars is doing things, and I can't blame. It's like I can't blame the people. Even if I think about what I ran into in academia, I ran into a person who natally had his Mars squaring his Sun in a wider orb, which was also squaring my Sun. Okay, we have adjacent suns. And so I have the Mars Sun opposition. That person had the Mars Sun square. So he had his own Mars Sun issues, and together with mine. And I drew into my life basically a person who had this inner conflict that was stirring up. We were stirring up each other's inner conflict. Again, growing through crisis rather than Mars trining, having Mars sextiling, Mars trining. That's basically where people have this more peaceful, more growing together, and the potential to grow harmoniously. It can be competitiveness, but it can be more joyous and fair play, rather than this tremendous crisis. And with two Taurus suns, this was really ridiculous because it's two people that want peace and act in the other way around. And that is another thing where, Sun here shows me my Sun Mars. Whether if it was Venus, it would be my relationships. Do I act in accordance with my values? Okay. You could say peace is a value, but you could also say, I was talking about, I think, the Me Too previously, and how we wanted autonomy over our body, and the way to get that was basically to let it go and allow our body to kind of dictate the action in a way that if a person who would violate our boundaries would say, my body made me do it, we would not accept it. But to actually gain our freedom, we had to let our body do the job, and kind of like, well, I need to say it because I need to say it, and I feel a gunk of energy dissipating from my womb and through my throat chakra. It kind of like my body speaks through me, and to gain autonomy, rather and that's very hilarious. But that would be Venus Mars. Okay, what is the value that I want to achieve? How do I get it? And what's the funny dissonance between them? With Sun Mars, it's more like my shining confidence requires some peace, and I constantly act in a way that undermines the very peace that I need to build my kingdom. And so I become heartbroken ever so often, way too often, and then it changes my worldview and so on and so forth, but through crisis. So it's like necessary changes through crisis, and I'm like, how do I bring more of a Mars sextile Sun into my life? How do I bring more of a Mars trine Sun into my life and learn to do it the harmonious way rather than the opposition that is, and it is my natal chart. But you can see how what surrounds Mars, what's co-present with Mars, is given a timestamp to the Mars return, just like a solar return. Okay? For a solar return, we look at the interaction between your natal chart and the solar return chart. We can look at houses. We can do it with other returns, but for Mars return, what is Mars aspecting? Okay, if I know that Mars will be opposing Uranus, if I know, let's play with this chart and give you an actual example. So this is, yeah, this is just one. It's not on the minute, but it's just November 14. Okay, just 4 days before that. And November 14, it's the exact Mars return. It's still conjuncting the Sun. And you can see that the issue of the Sun already began now, when Mars is in 7 degrees Scorpio, co-present with the Sun. And it's opposing Uranus, almost at a degree. It's 1 degree orb. So I'll definitely be tending to revolutions, to whether it's a social credit score, and how does that thing affect my neighborhood, my life, my worldview, my traveling or whatnot. The moon will go over this degree, so it's going to be a very accentuated Mars return, because the moon is going to, we're basically going to have a new moon right before my Mars return. So I'm going to have both luminaries adjacent to my Mars, and this Mars is going to be opposing Uranus, trining Neptune, sextiling Pluto, and vaguely applying to square Saturn. I have a wider orb there, so I'm a bit more lucky. But you can see how, and it's going to in conjunct Rahu and Aries, which means that this is going to be a very visible, very powerful Mars return. Mercury is going to be in Sag, so it and it has this opposition with Uranus, so it's going to be a beyond the personal Mars return. First of all, I'm going to play a part in something that is grander than me, that has to do with either something to do with higher studies or religion, worldview, or international like traveling or something like that. And but that is going to be connected also to my neighborhood, my siblings. Okay, this is what it's going to bring to my natal chart. Okay, it's not like we read a solar return. You can do that. We also take a look at the interaction between them. This also means that I'm getting support from Neptune, which is conjuncting my ascendant, and I'm getting support from Pluto. Okay, so I'm going to have supportive forces that are actually of the plutocracy, and I'm going to have supportive forces perhaps to do with the healing community, or certain channeling through my body, because my first house is Pisces. But my actions are going to oppose the status quo that Uranus and Taurus brings, and that could be processed foods, that could be technology relative to, like, you know, the 15-minute city, that could be the social credit score. All these things are things that me and those plutocrats and those Neptune beings are actually on the other team of. Okay, we're opposing that, and there is a revolution that we are countering. So, but then this is also going to in conjunct Aries, which means that the timestamp begins with me having to think through what I want, because Aries is going to require sacrifices, and I have to be inclusive. Okay, that was with Aries. So my actions and my strategies have to be inclusive, more so than before. And for the sake of inclusivity, there are a lot of things that I won't do, or that wouldn't succeed. Okay. if I compare it to my previous Mars cycle, where Aries was pretty much at around the same place, then yeah, I have a Dutch passport, but I did not get my rights in Netherlands because there was another point of inclusivity for me to see, like how people are treated when they are refugees, and or what do governments use when you're given rights, what do government take from you, and all these things. There were like, in other circumstances, perhaps I could litigate and have like outcarrying and, I don't know, go abroad if I don't have housing there. So while in these circumstances, for the sake of inclusivity, I went the rough way. Okay, I was returned to the place that I came from practically before war, but that was not known then. And I went through the passage that a person that doesn't have a passport would go through. Okay, because Aries required something different, required me to see something that on the long run will benefit me, because being more inclusive is way more important now when it comes to the Aries placement than going about your Mars. Because Aries is going to, like, those achievements that I would achieve would be sacrificed in favor of that inclusivity. And here there is something pretty much the same. Okay, so I could get help from like plutocrats, I could get help from like channeling, but Aries requires something of me. There is some sort of an advancement that sacrifices my. This is like, it's kind of sacrificing only what is good for me in favor of something that is way more inclusive, and that can cause frustration. It can cause me to feel like a bit of a failure when I try to act. So I'm perhaps destined to fail at trying something. It's like I'm destined to try something, but also destined to fail at trying something. And this is a lesson about probably ableism and neurodivergence and stuff that, had this placement with Aries not been, I would probably succeed doing that or even ace that. But there is just something for me to understand about inclusivity, so that my strategies are inclusive, so that my climbing up the ladder is inclusive, is not on the account of people right now, which is more important for my well-being on the long run. So this is a Mars return. And now, since we have some more time, I want to talk about Mars and Sun. I touched on that a little bit. So Mars and Sun, hard aspects, natally or in transit. So the Sun, other than a father or mother, depends on who we grew up with, is also the kingdom that I'm building. Okay, it's the I am that takes time to mature, because the Sun is my personality. Okay, if the ascendant is both of my life path, my personal life path, and the first impression that I make, and traditionally this is me. Okay, if something targets the ascendant, it's going to happen to me, not to my father, not to my mother, not to my pets, because Sun is ruling my sixth house, but to me. Okay, but the Sun is also what I'm growing into, for all of us. Yes, and that means our personality. What kind of a person am I becoming? Now, Mars is the way to go. When I have Mars, if I have a goal, Mars is how I get it. What is my strategy? What is my way of being in the world? Now, we would like to think that who we are is our way of being, and our way of being turns us into who we are. But there is who we are, and then there is our way of being. And when our way of being is not in alignment with who we are, we find it difficult to become who we are. Mars is drive. Mars is passion. Mars is action. And Mars also rules weapons and things that are broken. Okay? For a remedy of Mars, according to Nikola Stojanovic, we would either place sharp object or swords or the color red, or we would have, if it's a home related, and I think I made an episode about this. I don't know if I made it, if I recorded it or not. No, I think I didn't record it. I recorded it in my head only. Every episode begins in my head. So having a wall that is not finished in your house is a Nikola Stojanovic remedy for Mars in the 4th house, or Mars ruled 4th house, or ruler of the 4th house in a Mars sign. Okay. And I see it in the house that I moved into, and I find it beautiful. So it doesn't take all the conflicts away, but it definitely is a remedy, because the energy of Mars go to that thing that is not broken. It tends to that is not finished, and it tends to trying to complete it more so than to break in something so that it can fix it. Having Mars in relationship to relationships can be really annoying, because it can create a cycle of something is broken, you fix it, then you break it, which can be it's an actual literal description of an abusive relationship cycle. It doesn't mean that you have to be that those have to be abusive. It just means that you need to start new things more, and to not get into kind of like a stalemate position, because otherwise you would tend to break each other. Okay. So having Mars associated with like our 7th or 5th can denote those things. And so if Mars is also broken things, and Sun is also our vision and our personality and our heart of vulnerability, Mars hard aspect in Sun can mean a person that can have experiences of heartbreak. And it doesn't only mean romantic. Okay, if you watched my previous video, which is not open to comments, you know that I had a heartbreak of the situation I was at on a mundane level in the world. Okay, that's also a heartbreak. And indeed, Mars is in my 9th house. Okay, applying to oppose the Sun. And so I addressed Sedna yesterday, because the moon was going over Sedna, and experiences of betrayal and stuff that are associated with Sedna. But there also is a heartbreak. This unfortunately can be associated with betrayal, but not only when it comes to hard aspects between Mars and the Sun. Okay, you can feel heartbroken romantically, but also in terms of your drive, or you're trying to do something in life, try to build your kingdom, but because your actions are not in alignment with your heart, or basically you are heartbroken, or you lose drive and lose passion, which is something I've dealt with and continue to deal with. And I ask myself how to succeed happily. So when you have Mars opposing that Sun, you could have like fights with certain leadership figures. So it can be father or mother, and anybody who's a leader, performers. Okay, you can have ego clashes with people who are performers, just because of your actions. Okay, it basically means you. One of the descriptions I heard for this aspect is rubbing people the wrong way. You just by being who you, it's like the way that you are being who you are is in dissonance with who you are, and that reflects in rubbing people the wrong way. Unfortunately, if you're not aware of this could draw into your life people who would make you extra aware of this by them having hard aspects to Sun, like what happened to me in academia. Okay, it's not only that we had the Mars squaring each other's Mars, we were emasculating each other, and that I ended up as a Me Too case. Okay, this is serious. But also the Sun square Mars, and I have Sun opposition Mars, so he would have the opposition from my Mars to his Sun, and I would have the opposition from the square from his Mars to my Sun. We would kind of carry that and like brought these difficulties into each other, and it became like a crescendo of ridiculous actions and demoting and really bad karma. Okay, really bad karma. And you try to get why is it? Because when you internally have a certain personality is not like it, you don't understand what is going on, or how are you steering that in your actions, or how does that thing kind of evolves and devolve. So there's another aspect when I was like, oh, Sun. So what would the Mars trine Sun do? What would the Mars sextile Sun do? Okay. And then you can try to think about people you can begin to bring in people into your life. After you go through the hard aspect, usually you want to resort, your soul is crying out for a resolution, and a lot of these resolutions are going to come in the form of other people with whom you have more harmonious aspects in synastry. Okay, so let's say I carry the Mars opposite Sun, but suddenly I would either listen to someone or have somebody in my life that I know that has their Sun, let's say, sextiling my Mars or trining my Mars, that have their Mars sextiling my Sun or trining my Sun. Okay. When I was a teenager, which is about this age where we begin to assert ourselves and then we have a lot of conflicts, one of the people whom I watched his movies a lot was Jean-Claude Van Damme, who has Mars in Cancer, and people say as well as fallen Mars. Well, his Mars sextiles my Sun. So when I would think about how to defend myself at school and this and that, it's kind of taking refuge in Van Damme, and also the way that he would do his like martial arts was also through developing the body and also through dancing, was very helpful to me to assert my Mars and get out of the situation where every day I would find myself in another fight. And I was like, this is so insane because I'm such a peaceful person. Why do people fight with me? Okay. And so even a person who has a supposed fallen Mars, because this Mars was sextiling my Sun, Brad, first of all, returned to me kind of like my confidence in myself, and I would watch Van Damme movies rather than stir up fights with people, and eventually come out of the situation. As a teenager, it was horrid. Up until today, fourth grade, something that was horrid to me. I was more scary to other people than like people were afraid of me, but I was terrified. So I do have a quite little Mars. It's 22nd degree retrograde Mars in Scorpio. Okay, I could kill someone. Okay, it's not by purpose, but this is a little Mars. Okay, but I because my Sun is in Taurus, then I so wouldn't like for that to happen. And you see this dissonance between the action, the drive, the sudden kick, the sudden push, the sudden whatnot. It can be lethal, and the person is like, I just want peace. Okay, so better to watch some Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. So perhaps this can be a solution even this time. But then you see when you have a hard aspect and you tend to that and you're like, God, I want a resolution, you'll begin to draw into your life the Mars trine Sun people, the Mars sextile Sun people, okay? People who have less inner conflict between who they are and how they assert themselves. And then just by the vicinity of these people, if their chart interacts with yours good, then you will begin to adapt your behavior. First of all, awareness is key. Okay, awareness is key, because if we're not doing our Mars right, and most of us aren't, anybody has some challenge with Mars, and this is our aggression, this is our sexuality, this is our boundary setting, is the place where we can be lethal to people. Okay, by an action, by a word, by the way that we interact is how we come across when we act for ourselves or for others. Okay, Mars Scorpio can have a little bit of a savior conflict, or Mars in general can be a bit of a savior complex, not because it's highly Neptunian, but simply because it is the protector. But when something is not broken, then it needs something broken to fix. So it should exert its energy by inventing stuff or tending to, I don't know, why don't planes flap their wings, which I am still undergoing a research about why don't planes flap their wing right now, while looking at but like those things work with my Mars way better than constantly trying to defend people who might not even need my defense. Okay, awareness is key when it comes to tending to our Marses. And when you are willing to learn how to do something better, knowing that the tendency is there, but you can be surrounding yourself intentionally with people who teach you to do better, who teach you to do better than yourself. And it's because Mars' quality is such that it likes to fix something that is not so, then if somebody has good relationship with their Mars, they usually are happy to be there. They usually are kind of like, they're like a good example of something. And awareness, again, is key. So just to turn around like, hey, I don't know how to do that. Then if you have good relations with that Mars and you have good Mercuries, you can communicate so that you learn how to do that. We have to get over this notion of the I don't know how to do that. And when you have a tool like astrology, then you are more competent at diagnosing who is who and what is happening. So if you have hard Mars Sun aspects, look to the people who have easier Mars Suns. How do they use creativity? You might want to, if you have people who have their Mars sextiling or trining your Sun, or their Sun sextile and trining your Mars, then you might want to, whether these are famous people or these are just people around you, you might want to learn from them. You might want to interact with them more, or to surround yourself more, or to consult with them before you act, which is very difficult to do. But those are tremendous changes, because eventually you're going to become more acceptable both to yourself, okay, because you're going to be mitigating the inner triggering that you do to yourself. When you have Mars and Sun hard aspects, you trigger yourself, okay? And it can be like a little bit of a walking satire. So learning to laugh at yourself. It's like, oh, am I undermining my own shine again? Am I doing something that's undermining my confidence for no reason? So that can be a release and letting go of those issues to do with our way, and understanding that we can improve upon our way in ways that are available for us. Because there are the things that you know that maybe it's better if you wouldn't have done them, but you couldn't possibly not do them. Okay, yesterday I felt that having Sun in a Venus sign, I really wanted to express how I feel, and I really felt like I want the world to die, and I said that, and, and that was my truth. Okay, I've learned how to express my heart. I was heartbroken by the universe, and that was my truth. Okay, it's a very harsh conflict things, but when you learn how to mitigate things and how to both speak what's on your heart and address that lethality, and even mitigate that lethality, then there are ways in which you can mitigate that. It's not about counting to 10, and it's not about, not saying things, but it is about being next to the energy that facilitates an opening of the path for you so that you can explore more options of self-expressions and behavior without feeling that this is not in alignment with who you are. Because to begin with, your own, if you have a Mars Sun heart aspect, to begin with, your actions are not in alignment with who you are. So what you're learning is how to have your actions more in alignment with who you are, rather than acting in ways that are not who you are. Okay, this, if you get that, it will be a lot easier to invite and to open things, because if you get that right now you are acting not in alignment with who you are, then what you desire is not to mitigate your actions so that you won't shine, but to have your actions contribute to your shine and your confidence. Just more in alignment with who you are. How do I act more in alignment with who I am? How do I assert myself more? Okay, so for you, it's going to be asserting yourself more, not less. Because to fight everyone, you haven't really, you didn't feel like you were asserting yourself. You felt loss of control. And to not speak, then of course you feel like disconnect. So both ways lead to disconnect. You have another way to do that. That's kind of like trining your sun, sextiling your sun, and kind of think, okay, what would a Mars trine sun do? What would a Mars sextile sun do? And have a person who has this aspect to your synastry, and perhaps even in their own natal chart. So you have kind of like their energy operating, and you're kind of leading into that and taking action more in the line of that type of a strategy. And now you're going somewhere. And here you also have to understand that not everything will work, because if you take it like, with me, it would be Mars is exalted in Capricorn, but Mars in Capricorn is opposing my moon. Okay? And so if I would try to do things the Mars Capricorn way, perhaps it would be extremely effective and I would get somewhere in the world, but I would feel psychologically broken. This is when I ask, how do I succeed happy? So there is the intricacy, and I don't have all the answers. It's a part of my own cycle. But if you are having Mars return right now, then Sun is very visible, and you will see how that relates. So if you have a Sun sextile or trine Mars, it's easy to assert yourself. It's easy to be creative, to have creative solutions to problems, to set a goal that's in alignment with who you are and achieve it. To be successful, basically, is very successful. If all else is well, okay. Is a very successful thing, and that success could give you a sense of joy even when other things like fall apart. If you take the Kurt Cobain case, then Kurt Cobain was a successful musician even though all else was falling apart. So you had this, well, there's that his music that was touching people and was making a difference, making an impact. Okay, Sun is also inspirations when we make an impact on the world, it's not just on midheaven. And he still is Kurt Cobain. Okay, it's not going to save your whole life, but it's one thing that you can intervene in favor of yourself in the world. That's a point of interference that is worth tending to. So this is the Mars, and this is the cycle. So I hope you understood how we look at the time around our Mars return. It's not a surprise that this is a Mars. Okay, Mars day, Mars hour right now. So, and the midheaven, well, perhaps I will wait for the midheaven to go to Sagittarius. But this is a very Mars teaching. So Mars teaching on a Mars day. It's a timeless teaching. Now we have Mercury with Mars. So if this is happening, if you have a new Mars return right now, maybe there are something to do with journalism, something to do with investigation. I don't remember my previous Mars return, but I would assume that Mercury was highly involved there, especially with the figures that I met in life. And they were not always alive, but yes. And Mercury also rules children and trade and technology. So those issues, if right now you're having your Mars return, so those issues are also impacting. The moon is right now in 11th degree of Gemini. But this is where you are exploring themes. Oh, I think about victory and being victorious, kind of like the moon leaving Aldebaran. If I think about my Mars cycle, is basically the themes of the letter V in occult, thinking back to the internal political stuff to do with that. What is victory, being victorious? Archangel Michael, okay, to be victorious over something. The role of victory, the need of people to win, to be victorious. And the fact that there are no winners in war, and so on and so forth, is very, very active for this. And the images, okay, what is the image of victory versus, or something like that, how to be victorious in life. Again, it's not something I felt particularly close to, but it's something that I needed to address as I needed to see what is on in my country, basically, and how is the notion or the need to be victorious operating in our personal lives, which is, when it comes to Mars, the word victory or being victorious or being competitive is at play. And Aldebaran is victory that can be like at all costs. But it's something that did play a part in my life in more than one way, or even dealing with people for whom being victorious matters a lot, while I seek like win-win, but perhaps my actions stir up that sense where they would only feel victorious if, but essentially there is no such thing as a victory over somebody else, because most games are not, they're repetitive. So that's something we are learning mundanely. And oh well, I think I will post it now. Because I have another video to make about Aries. Yeah. So thank you for listening.